Emily was a pleasant young woman, only slightly older than my eldest daughter, who is 35. I had encountered her multiple times at events at the school where my wife worked. I was aware that she and my wife kept in regular contact, and I had unintentionally become involved in the drama surrounding Emily's divorce. From what I observed, her ex-husband seemed like a classic example of a selfish and inconsiderate man. He was known for pursuing other women while on work trips, and when his infidelity was discovered, he refused to take any responsibility. Instead, he shifted the blame onto Emily, accusing her of not living up to his expectations in their relationship. He claimed she was insufficiently affectionate, unappealing, and even blamed her for his own failures when he was home. Why am I sharing this with you? Well, it's the Friday evening before the opening day of deer season, and instead of going to the cabin with my wife, as I usually do, I'm on my way to pick up Emily. Nearly 12 years ago, my wife and I had the chance to buy 20,000 acres of Missouri forest, filled with oaks and pines at an excellent price. Since then, we've invested countless hours in developing a small weekend cabin, creating ATV trails, and preparing wildlife food plots. Together, we've turned the property into a fantastic place for deer hunting. This trip would usually be a tradition shared between my wife and me, but this year was different. A few weeks ago, during dinner, my wife informed me that she wouldn't be joining me for the first weekend of hunting season. She had been chosen to attend a series of meetings on educational reform at the state capitol, which we jokingly call the Big House. While it was a prestigious opportunity for her, it felt like a bit of an inconvenience for me. Normally, I would have gone hunting alone, something I had done many times before. But after a minor heart incident earlier that year, my wife insisted I shouldn't spend the weekend in the woods by myself. Despite my protests, she arranged for Emily to join me on her first hunting trip. Though she claimed to be skilled with firearms, she had never had the chance to hunt deer. To add to the situation, this trip coincided with my birthday, and my wife wouldn't be there to celebrate. When I arrived at Emily's house, I gave a short honk of the horn, a gesture I usually do, but was specifically asked to make this time. The front door immediately opened, and Emily appeared, weighed down by a considerable amount of gear. Accepting my role as her guide and companion for the weekend, I got out of the truck to help her load her belongings. Describing her as talkative would be an understatement. She kept up a continuous stream of conversation the entire drive to the cabin. Words like cheerful, bubbly, and energetic came to mind as she filled the air with her chatter, which stood in stark contrast to the quiet, reserved person my wife had described over the past few months. I didn't mind at all. I actually preferred her liveliness to the more somber mood that had been around lately, especially given that we were about to spend several hours together in a small hunting blind. We reached the cabin around 9 p.m., and I immediately started setting things up, turning on the power, water, and heating systems. Although the forecast predicted the temperature would drop to about 50 degrees, it seemed better to wake up in a warm cabin rather than a cold one. By 9:30, a fire was crackling in the wood stove, and warm air was circulating into the main room. Emily had already gone up to the loft, her designated sleeping area, and was busy organizing her gear for the morning. Meanwhile, I settled in the great room and turned on the satellite receiver to see if I could catch the end of an old war film. As I was deciding whether to use the shower, Emily called down from the loft, asking if it was okay. I gave my approval, saying, "Sure, go ahead." Earlier, I had shown her the cabin's bathroom, which was designed with efficiency in mind. The cabin was heated by a wood stove, with solar power supplemented by a backup generator. The bathroom had a unique setup with two large sliding doors, one leading to the bedroom and the other to the great room. When open, they allowed the warm air to circulate, but also ensured privacy when closed. I felt proud of its practicality. While I was absorbed in the film, I was taken off guard when Emily came down the spiral staircase. As I sat near the sofa, my attention was drawn to her as she walked past me, wrapped in nothing but a small towel that barely covered her body. She made her way to the bathroom, the towel riding up slightly as she moved. Reaching the door, she struggled to balance her soap, shampoo, and towel, almost dropping everything before she managed to close the door behind her. The idea that she was unattractive never crossed my mind. It seemed absurd to me, causing me to shake my head in an attempt to shake off the thought and refocus on the movie. The sound of the shower starting brought unwanted thoughts of Emily just behind the door and the possibility of her stepping out. I scolded myself, reminding myself that she was a friend of my wife's, and that my role here was to teach her hunting, not to entertain improper thoughts. Still, her soft singing drifted through the walls, making it harder to concentrate. Eventually, the singing stopped, leaving only the sound of running water. I wasn't worried about her running out of supplies, as I had access to hot water thanks to the instant heater. Still, I was surprised by how long she was taking. I was glad she had chosen to shower tonight instead of in the morning. Then I heard her voice again, low and unmistakably filled with enjoyment, filtering through the thin walls of the bathroom. The realization of what was likely going on made my mind race. I scolded myself once more, trying to shift my attention back to the movie. After what felt like forever, the water finally stopped, and I heard her humming softly again, probably drying herself off. My mind couldn't help but wander, imagining how she must look, entirely nude. I'm definitely a very lustful person, which is connected to my still active sex drive and the fact that my wife usually shows little interest. It's not entirely her fault. When the organs responsible for producing those hormones are removed, it becomes hard to feel desire. We truly care for each other, but the imbalance over the past few years has caused a lot of disagreements. We're still figuring out how to make it work and what steps I need to take to encourage her to want intimacy more often. It's frustrating when it's only once a month. And now, going to bed is more about sleep than affection. Much better, she said, opening the door and holding a towel partly across her body as she walked toward the stairs. The towel covered her chest, with another part being used to dry her hair, and the rest hung down between her legs, leaving her sides and back exposed. She stepped onto the stairs and began climbing, while I tried and failed to stop myself from staring at her mostly bare body. Part of me almost felt relieved when she reached the top and vanished from my sight. You know, I really appreciate your wife inviting me here. I think I'm going to have a great time, she said, coming back down the stairs, now wearing a pair of tiny navy shorts and a white cropped top. She stepped off the stairs and walked past me just enough to settle down on the couch next to me, holding what looked like an empty peanut butter jar. Tomorrow should be interesting, I said, feeling a bit uneasy. You're not usually shy, are you? I asked. If you're a woman, I can perform this somewhere else, I added gently. No, I'm not shy, she replied, though I was still unsure about the context, especially as she twisted open the peanut butter jar and set the lid aside. Then, as if it were completely normal, she removed her shirt, revealing her left breast. I froze, silently observing as she carefully expressed milk into the jar. Lindsay mentioned you always supported her breastfeeding all your children, she said. She told me my husband found it disgusting. I agreed, still distracted by her bare breast in her hand. At that time, breastfeeding was widely accepted, but it seems like society has been backsliding, making it harder for women to breastfeed in public again. The only way I can do it now is by expressing milk while I'm at work, she added. You used to help her with that, I asked. Yes, I helped her with pumping several times. I'm sure she appreciated it, she replied softly. I could hear the quiet affection in her words. I always thought she'd want someone to do that for her, she continued. I wish someone would do that for me, but my husband would never. She whispered the last part while carefully setting the jar between her knees on the sofa, then removed her crop top, leaving her chest completely exposed. The waist. What do you mean by just this once? Would you be able to do it for me? I'd like to see, I asked about how it feels, shocked. Please express a little milk for me. I'm sure Lindsay wouldn't mind. It's just milk. I started to object, knowing my wife would be upset about me touching another woman's breasts, especially a friend of hers. But I'm sure she wouldn't care, Crystal said, reaching for the jar between her legs and leaning over my lap. Her left arm resting between the arm of the sofa and my left leg, her bare back brushing against my stomach. Now, you can simply reach over me and help with the other side, she said softly. Crystal, I started to object. This is really inappropriate. Oh, come on, it'll be fine, she said. You'll just take a small amount of milk from my breast. I replied, no, we're not doing that. I muttered, still in disbelief that she'd even suggest something like that. She sighed softly, saying it felt different as my hand squeezed again. I also sighed, hoping this wouldn't reach Lindsay. I began to massage her breast gently, "You have such strong yet tender hands," she said. "I can't describe how good that feels." "As long as you don't tell Lindsay," I replied. "Trust me, I'm sure she wouldn't mind," Crystal said. "But if you're worried, I'll stay quiet." "It's better that way," I said, "because I'm sure she'd kill me for this." As I continued to gently squeeze her soft breast, filling the jar with milk. "That's enough," she said softly, pulling my hand away from her breast and placing it on her flat, firm stomach, just above the waistband of her shorts, while she carefully set the jar beside me on the couch. She turned her head to look up at me, then shifted on my lap to face me, her breasts pressing against me. She took my hand again and guided it down to press it flat against her stomach, which I'll admit stirred something in me. She released my hand and lowered hers to unsnap her shorts. The soft click of the clasp, followed by the slow sound of the zipper as it descended. As she eased her shorts down, my heart began to race. "Crystal," I started, but she put a finger to my lips and whispered, "Shh, don't speak. I just want to enjoy the feeling of your touch. It's been so long since anyone has touched me like this," she said. Gently, she took my wrist, guiding my hand down, while lifting one leg and hooking her foot over the edge of the couch, spreading her legs and directing my hand to the center of her body. "Crystal, please don't stop now," she pleaded. "I just need to feel someone." "This feels so good," she said, seeking out physical contact with me. "I love the softness of your fingers and the firmness of your touch. Lindsay is so lucky." I sighed, feeling conflicted as she tugged at my sweatpants, pulling them down, leading to a more intimate moment. I sat there for a long time, staring blankly at the TV, barely aware that the movie had finished a while ago. Eventually, I turned off the lights and got ready for bed, putting on my flannel pajamas before sliding under the covers. Morning came, or rather, the relentless beeping of the alarm made me get up to turn it off. I got out of bed and shuffled into the bathroom, and after finishing my morning routine, I returned to the bedroom to get dressed. It was only after I had undressed that I remembered I wasn't alone. I quickly locked both the bedroom and bathroom doors, not wanting her to come up before I was ready. Expecting a cold morning followed by warmer weather, I chose lightweight thermal underwear and put on my usual camouflage hunting gear. Fully dressed and with my boots on, I went to the kitchen and called up to the loft for Emily to wake up. "Okay," she responded sleepily. I heard her footsteps on the stairs and turned to see her coming down the spiral staircase, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, completely naked. Her breasts, fuller and heavier with milk, looked even larger than the night before as her chest moved with each step. She yawned and said, "I'll be down for breakfast in a minute," before heading to the bathroom without closing the door. From the kitchen, I had a limited view as I was busy cooking bacon. When she came out again, still nude, she grabbed a jar of peanut butter from the fridge, sat at the kitchen table, and leaned forward slightly to express milk from her right breast into the jar. I frowned slightly while flipping the bacon and said, "You could put some clothes on." She grinned without raising her gaze and asked, "Don't you like seeing me naked?" I replied, I didn't say that, but as for clothes, I don't wear any at home after the girls leave for the night. This isn't your place, though. If it bothers you, I can cover up, but it doesn't seem necessary right now. Breakfast is almost ready anyway. You should dress warmly for the cold weather outside. I mentioned I had plenty of warm clothes, and she adjusted her left breast, which looked even bigger than the right. I took the bacon off the stove and poured the scrambled eggs into another pan. By the time the eggs were done, she finished her task and went upstairs to get dressed. I went to the shed to get the ATV, then asked, Are you ready? About 10 minutes later, Emily appeared outside the cabin, her breath visible in the cool morning air. I think so. Gun? Ammo? She asked with a grin. Ready, I replied, mounting the ATV. I extended my hand to help her climb on, and she grabbed the footrest, swinging up behind me, clutching her gun and pack with one hand. I secured the gun in the second holder before starting our ride to the hunting spot, which was ideal, by a small pond next to a large food plot. The weather didn't matter much since I had built a permanent elevated blind that could comfortably fit 2 people. Originally, it was meant for hunting with my granddaughter once she was old enough. During the cold ride at around 15 miles per hour, Crystal huddled close to me for warmth. We stopped about 100 yards from the site to avoid scaring the deer. We'll walk from here, I said, taking her gun from the holder and handing it to her. How far? She asked. Just 100 yards. I don't want to spook them by getting too close with the ATV. While the ATV isn't a direct threat, mature bucks can detect its presence and leave the area, I explained. I grabbed my pack, switched off the ATV headlights, and turned on my red headlamp. The surroundings fell into darkness for a moment until our eyes adjusted. We made our way to the food plot and climbed into the blind. The structure was simple, with 2 levels, a wooden floor, and metal siding and roofing. On mornings like this, it could get quite cold, but the space quickly warmed up from our body heat. As the sun began to rise, I opened the windows and we settled in to wait. I closed my eyes, not fully asleep, but not fully awake either, for about 30 minutes. As dawn broke, the sky changed from black to deep purple, then dark blue, with orange hues gradually brightening into pale blue as sunlight bathed the treetops. The conditions were perfect, and the spot was well known for good hunting. All that was left was to wait for a deer. My rifle was unloaded, as this trip was meant to teach Emily. It's beautiful out here, she whispered. Indeed, I replied softly. All we need now is a deer. This is a great spot, I added. I've harvested nearly a dozen deer that came to drink from the pond. We sat in silence for almost an hour until I spotted the first movement of the day. It was completely still, with no wind to stir the leaves, so even the slightest movement about 100 yards away caught my attention. I whispered to Emily, pointing toward the deer that was cautiously approaching the food plot. It was a young buck, its antlers thin and spiky compared to a mature buck's. Younger bucks tend to be less cautious, but if they survive long enough, They learn to avoid making mistakes, like wandering into open fields during hunting season. How do they know it's hunting season? You might ask. I don't know for sure, but they always seem to. Emily carefully raised her rifle, sliding it through the front opening of the blind, lining up the shot on the buck. She shifted positions, adjusting her stance until she had a clear shot through the scope, waiting for him to turn. See how he's sniffing the air, I whispered. He thinks he caught a scent. Predictable. Yep, she murmured, remaining patient as the buck took its time. A head-on shot could work, but I don't want to ruin any good meat by hitting the stomach. Exactly, I said. Okay, when he turns broadside, aim just behind his shoulder and pull the trigger. I understand, she whispered, as the deer slowly turned to its right. As she moved toward the thicker undergrowth near the pond, I urged her to take action, hoping she'd seize her moment. Suddenly, all I heard was a sharp click. No gunshot, no recoil, no smoke, just the click. Emily muttered an expletive, pulling the rifle back and working the lever to load another round. But by the time she readied herself for another shot, the buck had disappeared into the brush, taking her opportunity with it. So, you didn't load your rifle when we settled in? I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. I thought I did, she replied with a pout. I forced myself to stay calm. He may come back, she added optimistically, placing the rifle down with a sigh. After a moment, she continued, Oops. I leaned back, sighing. I wouldn't have taken that chance either, but for a beginner, any shot's a good one. We sat in quiet reflection for about 10 minutes before she stood, or at least attempted to, given the small space, and started taking off her jacket. Are you okay? I asked. I'm fine, she replied. It's just that it was supposed to be cold, but it's getting warm in here. Probably over 70 degrees in here already, with the sun beating down on us, she said, adding, but outside it's not that warm. Well, I'm not sitting out there, she said, discarding her jacket and unlacing her boots. What are you doing? I whispered. I'm getting rid of these long johns. I'm roasting, she replied softly, taking off one boot and then the other. Standing carefully to avoid hitting her head on the metal, she unbuttoned her camouflage pants and slid her green thermal underwear down her legs. After sitting again, she stood up once more, pushing the garment over her hips and down her legs. I couldn't help but notice as she exposed more of her skin until she sat next to me, now fully undressed. There, she said with a laugh, naked co-ed hunting. Yeah, I mumbled, unable to look away. Will you join me? She asked provocatively. Disrobe? I asked, confused. No, she replied. I meant the deer. We can't be seen from here, and I doubt anyone will spot us. Undress or what? I asked, stunned. It wouldn't be co-ed naked hunting if you didn't, she teased with a smile. I hesitated, struggling to understand her suggestion. This is really inappropriate, I muttered under my breath. Oh no, not again, she said. It's worse for you to milk me while I'm sitting on your lap than it is for us to be naked in a deer blind. I sighed and asked, "You wouldn't want me telling your wife, would you?" She looked at me with a playful gleam in her eye, suggesting that while I might be persuaded to stay silent, it wouldn't take much for her to change my mind. "So, if I take my clothes off, you won't tell her I was naked with you?" I asked, trying to be sure. "That's about right," she answered with an unwavering smile. I exhaled, already feeling like I was in a difficult position. "What's a little more?" she said cheerfully. I began unlacing my boots, and within minutes I had discarded all my clothes, while Crystal tossed each item out the window. We were both now nude, except for our boots. "Now it's really naked co-ed hunting," she laughed. "Indeed," I replied dryly. She stood as much as the confined space allowed and turned to sit on my lap, her back against my chest, one leg draped over mine. She leaned in close and guided my hands to her chest. "I need to express some milk, and I'd prefer you to do it," she said. At first, it felt like a demand, but I could tell she was simply pushing me to act. As things grew more intimate, I began to feel a gnawing discomfort. I was betraying my wife, not once, but twice, and even finding some twisted pleasure in it. What kind of person was I becoming? What kind of husband? I realized I had to come clean, but how could I do that without making things worse for Emily? "I think we should head back," I suggested, abruptly breaking the silence. "That's fine," Crystal agreed, "but our clothes are outside." "I know," I said, forcing a weak laugh. "You threw them out the window so I could grab them. But it's cold out there. I'll freeze." "If that's the price, so be it," she said firmly. After a brief pause, Crystal stood, reluctantly grabbed our clothes, and tossed them back through the door before following me inside, slightly shivering from the cold. The interior of the cabin wasn't much warmer, especially since the door had been left open. She returned to my lap, seeking warmth, and instinctively I wrapped my arms around her. We stayed like that for several minutes, my hand gently caressing her body until she broke the silence with a teasing whisper. "Keep that up, and you might just find yourself wanting me again." "Sorry," I muttered quickly, pulling my hands away to rest on her waist. "I'm not complaining," she said, guiding my hands back to her chest. "I'm just saying it's turning me on again, or you may need to love me again when we get back." "That's probably not the best idea," I said cautiously. "We've already crossed a line." "Maybe," she chuckled. "Maybe not." Her tone was playful. "Let's go shower. We both need it, and I'm curious if we can fit." I thought about the cramped little shower stall Lindsay and I had. "I don't know," I said, realizing too late what I'd implied. "Perfect," she said, lifting me off the bench and guiding me toward the shower. As we walked, I couldn't help but wonder how I had ended up in this situation and what consequences might follow. We quickly dressed, no need for underwear, given our plans, and the ride back to the cabin on the ATV was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the warmth from the wood stove embraced us as we carried our things inside. Crystal immediately undressed, eager for more intimacy, but instead of coming to me, she climbed the spiral staircase to the loft, calling for me to follow. "I have something for you," she called out, and I followed, still only wearing my boots and pants. She was standing by the bed with a sly smile, hands hidden behind her back. "Here," she said, presenting me with a small blue envelope. I turned it over to reveal the initials MLH, written in my wife's familiar handwriting. Opening it, I found a birthday card. The front read, "To my sweet, loving husband." Inside, the printed message said, "If only I could find a way to show you how special and wonderful you are. You are truly one of a kind, and my love for you will last forever." Beneath that, my wife had handwritten, "I've seen so many marriages fall apart later in life because of their sex lives. I don't want that to be our fate. You're so good to me in so many ways, and I refuse to lose you, despite our disagreements. I'm confident we'll work things out. In the meantime, I want to make sure you're happy. So, for your birthday, my gift to you is Crystal. Enjoy her as you like, and you have my blessing. Please save your affection for me until the end of the weekend. But one thing, did you like my gift? I don't need to know anything else. I adore you. Happy birthday." "You knew about this last night and today?" I asked, astonished. "Yep," she grinned, "for a few weeks." I looked at the card, still shaking my head in disbelief. "Do you come with cake too?" "You'll have to wait and see," she teased, stepping closer and pressing her soft chest against mine. She leaned in for a long, sensual kiss. "Shower?" she whispered, after finally breaking the kiss. "Might as well," I whispered softly, still trying to figure out how to thank my wife for such an incredible gift.